welcome to this deep dive. You know, when you look at a map, there is this incredibly comforting sense of, like, order to it all.
Oh, absolutely.
You see the little blue squiggles for rivers, the
Yeah.
neat topographical lines, the clearly marked trails. It's binary, really. You're either on the trail or you are off it. It just feels clean. It feels safe.
Right, because a map gives us this illusion of control. I mean, we desperately want the natural world to be categorized and predictable and just, visible from a bird's eye view.
Yeah, but today, we are stepping completely off that map.
Um,
Because the second you leave the pavement and enter the actual wilderness, well, that piece of paper is completely useless.
it really is.
We're unpacking a case today that is set in a landscape that is just, it's unpredictable, it's unforgiving, and it's entirely chaotic.
Right.
We're talking about the rugged Colorado Rockies in the fall of 1999.
Right.
Specifically, we are looking into the truly baffling disappearance of 3-year-old Jaryd Atadero.
Such a strange and heartbreaking case.
So it's October 2nd, 1999. Alan Atadero is a single father living this pretty idyllic mountain life. He and his twin brother, they actually own the Poudre River Resort.
Right.
And Alan, he loves the outdoors, and he is raising his 6-year-old daughter, Jocelyn, and his 3-year-old son, Jaryd.
Now, at the time, there is a group of 11 adults from a Christian singles network staying at the lodge, right?
Yeah, they were there doing some volunteer work around the property. It's this gorgeous bluebird fall morning, and this group basically decides they want to take the kids on a little outing.
And Alan agrees, but he's operating on a very specific piece of information. I mean, he is told they are taking the kids to a local fish hatchery that is just 1.5 miles down the road.
Right, which makes perfect sense.
Exactly. It's flat, it's safe, and it's a completely appropriate excursion for a 3-year-old.
But for some totally inexplicable reason, and this is where things get crazy, once this group of 11 adults gets in the car with these 2 little kids, they skip the fish hatchery entirely.
Right. They just don't go.
They just don't go.
Yeah.
Instead, they drive 15 miles away to the Big South Trail in the Comanche Peak Wilderness. And we really need to talk about what this trail actually looks like, because this isn't some paved nature walk.
Not at all.
It sits at an elevation of 8,440 feet. We are talking about these narrow 24-inch ledges carved directly into the side of the mountain, loose shale underfoot, sheer drop-offs plunging straight down into a rushing river.
Yeah, it is a moderate to difficult trail for a fully grown adult in good cardiovascular shape. So when you factor in the elevation, the physiological realities for a 3-year-old are just severe.
I can't even imagine.
I mean, at 8,440 feet, the air is significantly thinner. A child that young will fatigue so rapidly, and their balance on that loose rock is going to be incredibly precarious.
Right.
Plus, the temperature swings in the shadows of a canyon like that can be drastic. It is categorically not a place you casually take a toddler, especially one who isn't yours without explicit permission from their parent.
It's honestly like dropping your kid off at a local petting zoo and then later finding out they were taken on an unguided safari.
Wow. Yeah, that's exactly what it's like.
And picture what Jaryd is wearing that day. He's 3. He's got on a fleece pullover, some blue sweatpants, and these little Tarzan sneakers.
Right, Tarzan shoes.
Yeah,
And
he hated having his shoes tied tight, so the laces are loose. So this group of basically 13 people starts hiking up this really treacherous path, and naturally the group sort of fractures.
yeah, people move at different paces on a hike.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And Jaryd is this energetic kid who grew up around the mountains, so he's just running ahead of the cluster of adults he's walking with.
Because to him, the environment isn't a threat. It's just a massive playground.
He's just having fun. He even stops briefly to chat with 2 fishermen who are coming down the trail. He asks them, in this totally cute toddler way, if there are any bears around.
And they tell him no, right?
Right. The fishermen tell him no. And they look up the trail and they actually see the hiking group just 50 to 80 feet behind Jaryd. So assuming the boy is perfectly safe and being watched, they just smile and let him keep walking up the trail completely alone.
Which is wild to think about because those 2 fishermen are the absolute last people confirmed to ever see him alive.
It gives me chills.
The timeline of the vanishing is just incredibly compressed. I mean, somewhere between 10 to 20 minutes after that brief interaction, the adults finally realize they haven't seen Jaryd.
Just a 10 to 20 minute window. And during that tiny window, some members of the group, and this includes Jaryd's 6-year-old sister, they actually report hearing a scream.
But not a scream of terror, right?
Right. She didn't describe it as scary. She actually described it as a playful scream.
Yeah.
Like the sound a kid makes when they are playing tag and someone jumps out at them.
Wow.
Yeah. So the adults spend about an hour desperately searching the immediate area. They find nothing, and eventually they have to hike all the way back to the lodge to deliver just the most horrific news imaginable to his father.
I can't even fathom being that parent.
Me neither. But hold on a second, because I really struggle to comprehend the basic logistics here. I mean, how does a group of 11 adults lose track of a 3-year-old on a cliffside trail? And why would two grown men let a toddler just wander past them into the woods completely alone?
Well, I know it sounds incredibly negligent in hindsight, but this is actually a textbook demonstration of a psychological mechanism called the diffusion of responsibility.
Okay, what does that mean in this context?
So in a one-on-one setting, your vigilance is at 100%. You are watching that kid. But when you introduce 11 adults into a scenario, the human brain subconsciously delegates the burden of observation.
Oh, like everyone just assumes someone else is handling it.
Exactly. Everyone assumes someone else is actively watching the child. The fisherman saw the group right behind him and assumed the adults had eyes on him. The adults lagging in the back thought he was safely with the faster walkers in the front.
And the ones in the front thought he was right behind them.
Right. Individual vigilance drops drastically because the perceived safety of the herd basically overrides common sense.
That makes so much sense. It's terrifying as it is.
Huh.
Well, the moment the realization sets in, it triggers a massive, almost chaotic response. I mean, within hours, 65 search and rescue members are sweeping the canyon.
And that number just keeps growing.
Oh, yeah. Over the next week, that number balloons to over 200 trained personnel. They bring in professional trackers, canine units, dive teams plunging into these freezing river pools, and aircraft circling the canopy.
But this is where the sheer scale of the rescue operation kind of becomes its own worst enemy.
How so?
Because a rescue operation of that magnitude requires really rigid logistical control. And the Comanche Peak Wilderness simply does not allow for it. The terrain actively fights back against the searchers.
Right, including causing a literal horrifying aviation accident.
Yeah, the helicopter crash.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So they bring in this Huey UH-1N Air Force helicopter to run grid searches from the sky. But flying a Huey in a mountain canyon is incredibly dangerous.
It really comes down to density, altitude, and canyon aerodynamics.
Okay, unpack that for us.
Well, at high elevations, the air is really thin, meaning the helicopter's rotors have less physical air to bite into to generate lift. Combine that heavy fuel load with the sudden, violent downdrafts that just whip through those mountain canyons, and the aircraft can instantly lose its ability to stay airborne.
Which is exactly what happens here. The helicopter stalls out, it drops 100 feet like a stone, and crashes directly into the thick trees right above the Big South Trail.
It's a miracle anyone survived that.
Miraculously, everyone does survive the impact, but the toll is just brutal. Mark Sheets, who is a local search and rescue member on board, gets trapped in the trampled wreckage.
Oh, man.
Yeah, he suffers a severe concussion, a broken back with 3 fractured vertebrae, a shattered shoulder, and a 13-inch gash on his leg that literally leaves his femur entirely exposed.
Just horrific injuries.
They do manage to save him, but the crash creates an absolute nightmare for search. It pulls vital resources away from searching for Jaryd to instead rescue the rescuers. And the wreckage effectively shuts down a massive portion of the search grid.
And you know, that mechanical and physical chaos in the air was perfectly mirrored by the psychological and logistical chaos happening on the ground. And that was driven entirely by the media.
Oh, for sure. You have to picture the cultural landscape of Colorado in 1999. The John Benet Ramsey tragedy is incredibly fresh in the public consciousness.
Right, everyone is on high alert.
So the national news networks are primed for another missing child story, and they just descend on this remote canyon like an army. At one point, there are 17 massive TV satellite trucks parked shoulder to shoulder along this tiny 2-lane mountain highway.
Just a total circus.
You literally have network anchors stumbling around the wilderness in fur coats. And because this is being broadcast into millions of living rooms every single night, it triggers a flood of completely ill-equipped civilian volunteers trying to play hero.
And this is exactly where public interest fundamentally crosses the line from being supportive to being actively destructive.
Yeah, law enforcement is suddenly drowning in noise.
Right.
They are fielding calls from self-proclaimed psychics, giving them useless coordinates.
Unbelievable.
Right. A guy literally shows up barefoot with a mule, claiming he can track the boy. A Native American man arrives to perform drumming rituals, asking the mountain to return the child. It is an absolute circus.
And the tragic part is that the circus destroys the single most valuable tool the searchers have, which is the canine units.
Wait, how does it destroy the K9 units?
Well, we need to look at how scent tracking actually works. A human being is constantly shedding these microscopic rafts of skin cells, literally thousands of them a minute.
Okay.
A tracking dog's olfactory system processes those invisible rafts to build a three-dimensional scent map. But when you have hundreds of untrained volunteers, camera crews, and onlookers tromping off trail through a pristine environment, they act like a sensory bomb.
Oh, wow. I never thought about it like that.
Yeah. Every dropped candy wrapper, every spilled cup of coffee, every new boot print introduces a violently loud new smell. The microscopic evidence of a 3-year-old boy is completely obliterated by the scent of a reporter's fur coat. The dogs just become overwhelmed and effectively blind.
That is so frustrating. So the searchers are fighting the sheer drop-offs, they're fighting the canyon winds, and they're fighting the psychological overwhelm of managing a national spectacle.
And despite all of that effort, they find nothing.
Nothing. Not a thread of clothing, not a footprint.
Yeah.
Search is eventually called off. The snows come. Years go by. Jaryd's case goes completely agonizingly cold.
Until May of 2003.
Yes. This is the pivot point where a tragic missing persons case mutates into a physically impossible mystery.
Because the discovery of the evidence completely shatters the parameters of what investigators thought was even possible.
Exactly. So 4 years later, 2 businessmen, Rob Osborne and Gareth Watts, are out for a hike in the area. They are experienced outdoorsmen, and they decide to scramble off trail, tackling this incredibly steep, grueling 2,000-foot ridge of loose rock.
Way off the beaten path.
Way off, and about 500 to 550 feet completely above the trail where Jaryd vanished. They spot something. They find his clothes.
The location alone is baffling, but the condition of those clothes is really what makes this case a fixture in unsolved mystery communities.
Okay, let's break down the bizarre physical state of these items, because it's wild. His blue sweatpants are found turned completely inside out, and the fabric is torn to shreds.
Right, but not from an attack.
No. Wildlife experts analyze the pants and conclude the tears weren't from a violent attack at all. They were torn by birds and rodents, slowly pulling the threads apart over the years to build nests.
Wow.
His fleece jacket has some puncture marks, but is largely completely intact. And then, there are the shoes.
The shoes are the craziest part.
Jaryd's little Tarzan sneakers are found pristine. They are untied, looking almost brand new, with absolutely zero scuff marks on the soles or the toes.
They look exactly as if they had just been gently taken off.
Yes, and shortly after this discovery, an official recovery team scales that same treacherous ridge.
And that's when they find the human remains.
Yeah. Tucked deep into a rocky crevice, illuminated by a single shaft of sunlight, they find a piece of a fractured human skull. And resting on a log nearby, completely out in the open, is a single human molar.
And DNA testing confirms it.
DNA confirms the devastating truth.
So?
It's Jaryd. But I have to stop right here and just push back on this because the physics of this makes zero sense.
I know exactly what you're going to say.
I mean, I struggle to walk up an icy driveway without losing my breath. You are telling me a 3-year-old with a tiny stride climbed 500 feet up a near-vertical slope of loose, sliding shale on his own.
It seems impossible.
There is no physical way. And even if you entertain that impossibility, how did his untied shoes get 500 feet up a jagged mountain without a single scrape or scuff mark from being dragged or walked in?
You've hit on the core paradox of the Atadero case. It is a literal physical impossibility resting right in front of your eyes. It forces investigators, the family, and the public to try and force a logical narrative onto evidence that actively defies logic.
Right. And when you stare at an unscuffed shoe and an inside-out pant leg that offers zero real answers, the theories inevitably split into 2 fiercely contested camps.
The animal attack theory versus human foul play.
Exactly. Let's look at the mountain lion theory first, because law enforcement leaned pretty heavily in this direction.
They did.
They pointed out that some of the canine units had briefly alerted up that specific hillside during the initial 1999 search, but the terrain was considered just too treacherous and unlikely for a toddler to climb, so they didn't comb it thoroughly back then.
And scientifically speaking, mountain lions are ambush predators known to cache their prey.
Cache, meaning hide it.
Right. They will kill and then drag the body to a secluded, highly elevated spot to hide it from scavengers like bears or coyotes.
But Jaryd Atadero, Jaryd's father, consulted wildlife experts who basically ripped this theory apart.
They had some very strong counterpoints.
Very strong. First, large predatory cats typically go for the soft tissue of the stomach to access the organs. Yet Jaryd's fleece jacket was largely intact around the torso.
Right.
Second, there was no blood found anywhere on the garments and absolutely zero mountain lion DNA or hairs recovered.
Which is highly unusual for a lion attack.
Exactly. Third, a mountain lion does not carefully undress its prey, leaving sweatpants perfectly inside out.
No, they definitely don't.
And finally, the ultimate sticking point is those pristine shoes. If a 150-pound cat dragged a 35-pound toddler by the collar 500 feet up a mountain of jagged rocks, those dangling shoes would be absolutely shredded.
They wouldn't be pristine and untied. So the collapse of the animal attack theory leaves this massive void, and the internet naturally rushes in to fill it with human intervention.
The foul play theory. Amateur sleuths on Reddit have dissected these details endlessly. The working theory online is that either a stranger lurking off trail or the two fishermen, the last people to see him, abducted him.
And their explanation for the clothes?
The theory suggests a human entirely undressed the boy, which perfectly explains the inside-out pants and the meticulously clean, unscuffed shoes. The perpetrator then allegedly climbed the ridge later to hide the clothing and evidence far away from the active search grid.
You know what is fascinating about these two warring camps is how perfectly they illustrate the psychological mechanism of confirmation bias.
Oh, that makes sense. How so?
People look at the exact same contradictory physical evidence and use it to confidently prove completely different realities.
Yeah.
One side looks at the lack of blood and says, "See? This proves an animal carried him off by his clothes without piercing the skin." The other side looks at the unscuffed shoes and says, "No, this proves a human carried him."
It's like a Rorschach test.
Exactly. The wilderness destroys context. It completely strips away the narrative, leaving only these fragmented objects that we desperately try to stitch into a story that makes sense. We should be clear that we aren't endorsing either of these theories today, just reporting on how people process the facts.
Absolutely. We are just looking at the source material. And when a physical mystery can't be neatly solved, it inevitably morphs into a psychological one. You see this most clearly in how Jaryd's father, Alan, tried to process the impossible.
Because trauma of this magnitude manifests in ways that seem entirely irrational to an outside observer, the human brain just cannot easily process the ambiguous loss of a child.
Alan's actions in the aftermath are just a heartbreaking look into a shattered mind. He actually refused to bury the skull fragment they found.
Right.
Instead, he kept it in a small cardboard box, resting on top of Jaryd's favorite toys, inside Jaryd's bedroom. Alan kept that room perfectly preserved, like a museum exhibit locked in 1999.
It's just devastating.
He wrote books detailing the case. He even engaged with a severely mentally ill teenager who kept contacting him, falsely claiming to actually be Jaryd grown up.
Wow.
Alan was so desperate for connection that he genuinely believed his son was trying to communicate with him from beyond the grave through computer glitches.
And from a psychological standpoint, finding patterns in random noise is a widely recognized trauma response.
Yeah, exactly. There was this one incident where Alan received an email from a family member, and in the text of the email was the random number 8217.
Okay.
Alan interpreted this specific sequence of numbers as a profound, supernatural message directly from Jaryd's spirit. Now, users on Reddit quickly pointed out the crushing reality of this.
What was the number, really?
8220 is simply the standard HTML code for a right single quotation mark.
Oh, no.
Yeah, the email software just failed to render an apostrophe correctly. He took a random string of broken code and built an entire spiritual communication out of it.
It is a devastating example of someone just searching the void for a lifeline.
But the public reaction to Alan's coping mechanisms is incredibly harsh. If you spend any time in these Reddit threads, they are deeply, uncomfortably divided.
I can imagine.
You have thousands of people accusing Alan of profiting off his son's horrific death, mostly because he frequently mentioned his $86 hardcover book during media interviews.
People can be so cynical.
They really can. People viciously attack him for pushing wild, unfounded conspiracies, suggesting rogue park rangers or occultist rings were involved. And they endlessly criticize his initial parenting, asking how a father lets a 3-year-old go off with a group of singles in the first place.
But there is a counter-movement within those same forums, isn't there?
There is. Others fiercely defend him. They point out the obvious. Losing a child to the wilderness literally breaks your mind.
Yeah, absolutely.
Grief makes people seek supernatural comforts when the physical, scientific world offers absolutely zero answers. And looking at all of this, I have to ask you, the listener, is it fair for us, sitting comfortably behind our screens decades later, to judge the bizarre, messy, desperate ways a parent tries to survive the unfathomable loss of their child?
It's a great question, and I think the discourse surrounding Alan highlights a deeply troubling dynamic in the modern true crime ecosystem.
What do you mean by that?
When a private, agonizing family tragedy becomes public domain, the internet begins to treat real human beings like characters in a thriller novel.
Oh, totally.
We demand that these people act rationally and grieve perfectly within a situation that is defined by pure irrational trauma. We want the neat 45-minute resolution of a detective show.
And life just isn't like that.
No, it's not. And when the real people involved fail to deliver that satisfying ending, the public turns their frustration onto the victims themselves.
So true. Let's sort of pull all of this together and look at the whole picture. We started with a beautiful fall morning and a catastrophic miscommunication that put a toddler in an environment his body just wasn't built to survive.
Right.
That led to an enormous, chaotic search that yielded nothing, followed by an impossible discovery 500 feet up a near vertical mountain. Pristine shoes, inside-out pants, and a mystery that remains officially, hauntingly unsolved more than 2 decades later.
This case really forces us to reflect on how we process a profound lack of information.
Yeah.
When you are faced with the vast, terrifying unknown, do you accept the chaotic, random cruelty of the natural world? Or do you invent elaborate, sprawling human conspiracies just to feel a fleeting sense of control over the uncontrollable?
That's a heavy question.
Right.
And that leads to a final, lingering thought for you to mull over after you finish listening today.
What's that?
Well, if our digital footprints and these endless archives of amateur internet theories outlast our physical bodies, how are future generations going to view cold cases like Jaryd's?
That is a fascinating point.
Will the massive online databases of speculation, debate, and judgment eventually overwrite the actual tragic human lives involved? Are we turning real bleeding tragedies into modern folklore, where the truth of what happened no longer even matters as long as the mystery keeps us entertained?
The transformation of a missing child into an immortal internet myth is a truly chilling prospect.
It really is. And it takes us right back to what we talked about at the very beginning of this deep dive. We so desperately want the map. We want the clean binary lines. We want to point to a spot on the paper and say, there is the answer.
The map isn't the territory.
Exactly. Out there in the wilderness and out there in the endless depths of the internet, the map isn't the reality. The reality is just deep, muddy water.